Doug Mercer had exactly 3 things left to his name: a half-empty bottle of synthetic whiskey, a career in ruins, and the access codes to the most forgotten outpost in the galactic fringe. As far as rock bottoms went, this one had excellent views. Approaching Epsilon 12 outpost, chirped the shuttle's automated system. Prepare for docking procedures. Doug snorted. Prepare for what? There's nobody there to care if I crash into the damn thing. The truth was, that's precisely why he'd chosen Epsilon 12. After the academic scandal, which absolutely wasn't his fault, no matter what the university ethics board claimed, he needed somewhere the galaxy wouldn't find him. Somewhere he could drink himself into oblivion without concerned colleagues staging interventions. Somewhere his spectacular fall from grace as the foremost human xenoanthropologist wouldn't be daily gossip. The shuttle slowed as the outpost came into view. It resembled a giant metal mushroom that had been beaten with an ugly stick, then abandoned for a few centuries to collect space dust. Perfect. Welcome to Epsilon 12 Research Outpost, the docking computer announced as the airlock sealed. Population 0. Last official habitation, 237 standard years ago. Current status, decommissioned. You and me both, pal, Doug muttered, grabbing his duffel bag. It contained clothes for a month, research notes nobody cared about anymore, and enough liquor to ensure he wouldn't remember either. The airlock hissed open, revealing corridors that looked surprisingly well maintained for an abandoned facility. Doug frowned. The life support was functioning too, which seemed excessive for an empty outpost. Hello, visitor. A cheerful hologram materialized, causing Doug to stumble backward. I am OSCAR, Outpost Systematic Care and Regulation. How may I assist your temporary visit to our absolutely vacant and completely uninhabited facility? Doug stared at the flickering image of what appeared to be a cartoon octopus wearing a bow tie. What the hell? Profanity detected. How delightfully human of you, Oscar beamed. I've been instructed to inform you that this outpost is totally deserted except for essential automated systems such as myself. There are definitely no other life forms here requiring your acknowledgement or investigation. Doug's xenoanthropologist instincts, dormant under layers of self-pity, twitched to life. That's oddly specific. Yes, specifically accurate, and not at all suspicious, Oscar agreed enthusiastically. Now, shall I show you to your quarters? The east wing is off-limits due to routine maintenance. The north section is off-limits due to cosmic radiation. The west corridors are off-limits due to temporal anomalies. And the sublevel is off-limits because it doesn't exist. Doug raised an eyebrow. What's left? The south wing. One functioning bedroom, a small galley, and communal showers. Please don't use shower stall 3. It's not haunted or anything, it's just temperamental with the hot water. As Doug followed the bobbing holographic octopus, he couldn't shake the feeling he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd come seeking isolation, but something told him Epsilon 12 had other plans. He took a long swig from his whiskey bottle. Oh, and do try not to wander at night, Oscar added cheerfully. The motion sensors are very sensitive and might accidentally mistake you for an intruder and deploy security measures. Wouldn't want you to get disintegrated by mistake. That would involve so much paperwork. Doug stopped walking. I thought this place was abandoned. It is. Completely. The automated security system is just very thorough. Somewhere in the distance, something that sounded suspiciously like a dropped cooking pan echoed through the corridor, followed by what could only be described as frantic shushing. Doug sighed. So much for solitude. It took exactly 18 hours for Doug's suspicions to be confirmed. He was nursing his synthetic whiskey in the galley when something large, purple, and with far too many limbs fell from a ceiling vent, landing with a splash in his reconstituted noodles. Gah! Human alert! Human alert! The creature shrieked, flailing in the noodle soup. Doug, too stunned to move, simply watched as the insectoid being extricated itself from his dinner, shook off the broth, and straightened what appeared to be a miniature tool belt around its thorax. "Well, this is embarrassing," it said in perfect standard English. "I was hoping to avoid this conversation for at least another day." "You're an Arcturian mantid," Doug said automatically, his xenoanthropologist training kicking in. "But you're purple. Arcturians are green." "How wonderfully reductive and typical of human xenoscience," the mantid replied, cleaning soup from its antennae. "We come in several colors, thank you very much. Name's Vex. Head engineer of Epsilon 12. The real question is, who are you and why are you contaminating my outpost with your bipedal mammalian presence?" Before Doug could answer, the holographic octopus Oscar materialized. "I see you've met our absolutely non-existent resident engineer," Oscar announced cheerfully. "This is awkward." "You think?" Doug snapped. "Should I activate Protocol 17? Oscar asked Vex. "The one where we jettison unexpected visitors into space and pretend they were never here?" "No," both Doug and Vex shouted simultaneously. The ceiling panel slid open again, and this time what appeared to be a floating ball of soft blue light descended into the room. "Vex, you blew our cover. Commander Kroll is going to be so mad." "Lamina, now is not the time," Vex hissed. Doug stared at the glowing orb. You're a luminari. I thought your species was mythical." "Oh, a fan." The ball of light pulsed happily. "I'm not mythical, just very shy. Also, I'm technically trespassing according to Section 47B of the Galactic Ordinance, so if we could keep my existence on the down low, that would be super." Everyone shut up. A new voice boomed as the door to the galley slid open with a theatrical hiss. In the doorway stood what appeared to be a 7-foot-tall lizard wearing what could only be described as a discount Space Admiral uniform, complete with medals that looked suspiciously like bottle caps. His scales were a mottled green with flecks of gold, and his expression suggested he'd just bitten into something extremely sour. "Commander Kroll, I presume?" Doug asked dryly. "That's Supreme Commander Kroll of the Epsilon 12 Independent Territory to you, human," the lizard growled. "And you're trespassing." "Actually," Doug countered, pulling up his authorization on his wrist device, "I have official access codes. This outpost was decommissioned 237 years ago and is Union property. If anyone's trespassing, it's you." Kroll's eyes narrowed to reptilian slits. "Vex, I told you we should have changed those access codes." "I did change them," Vex protested. 17 times. "This human must have high-level clearance." Doug smiled for the first time in months. "I'm some. Or rather, I was Professor Doug Mercer, head of xenoanthropology at Centauri University." "The Doug Mercer?" Lumina pulsed brighter. "The one who wrote Interspecies Cultural Exchange, Beyond the Anthropocentric Paradigm?" "That's my favorite book. I have all your papers in my data collection." Had all his papers, Kroll corrected with a smirk. "Before the plagiarism scandal." Doug's smile vanished. It wasn't plagiarism. It was parallel research. The Andromeda team published 2 days before my submission. Sure, Kroll waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with you now that you've discovered our little arrangement." "You could start by explaining what exactly this arrangement is," Doug suggested, reaching for his whiskey. "Because last I checked, this outpost was supposedly abandoned for centuries." Vex, Lumina, and Kroll exchanged glances. "We're refugees," Lumina said softly, her light dimming slightly. "All of us. Different species, different reasons." "This outpost sits in unclaimed space," Vex explained. "Technically no jurisdiction applies here. We've built a community of outcasts, misfits, and political refugees." 17 species currently, Kroll added grudgingly. All living in what your human diplomats would call harmonious cooperation, though I call it barely controlled chaos. Doug looked around. And nobody knows you're here? That's rather the point, Kroll said. And we'd like to keep it that way. Doug considered this, then raised his glass. Well, I came here to disappear too. Seems we're all running from something. Does this mean you won't report us? Lumina asked hopefully. Doug laughed. To whom? The academic community that blacklisted me? The union that couldn't care less about a forgotten outpost? Your secret's safe with me. I don't trust him, Kroll declared. You don't trust anyone, Vex pointed out. And I'm still alive, aren't I? Kroll retorted. Oscar's hologram reappeared. Not to interrupt this lovely first contact scenario, but there's an activation sequence initializing in sublevel C. Kroll's scales paled visibly. The sublevel that doesn't exist? That's the one. Oscar confirmed cheerfully. Impossible, Vex chittered anxiously. That section has been dormant for decades. Nothing down there even has power. All eyes turned to Doug. Don't look at me, he protested. I've been right here getting acquainted with your rotgut liquor and ceiling-dwelling insects. Lumina pulsed nervously. Then who activated it? Sublevel C smelled like dust, ozone, and secrets, a combination Doug had encountered many times in his archaeological digs. What he hadn't expected was the soft blue glow emanating from behind the massive blast doors that Vex was currently trying to override. This doesn't make sense, the purple-manted muttered, manipulating the ancient control panel with 3 limbs simultaneously. These systems were disabled. Completely. I personally removed the power couplings. Could they have been on a separate grid? Doug suggested, surprising himself with his own interest. He'd come here to drink and forget, not to solve mysteries. There is no separate grid, Kroll growled, pacing behind them. This entire section was sealed before we even arrived. Lumina hovered nervously over their shoulders. Maybe it's alive. Some technologies are semi-sentient, you know. If it's alive, I'm going to make it very dead, Kroll promised, patting the oversized weapon strapped to his thigh. The blast doors suddenly slid open with a groan of protest, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. In the center, hovering 3 feet above a pedestal, was an object that defied easy description. It resembled a gyroscope crossed with a fractalized crystal structure, all pulsing with energy that shifted between blue and violet. Well, Doug said after a moment of stunned silence, that's not ominous at all. What is it? Lumina whispered, drifting closer. Don't touch it. Everyone shouted in unison. I wasn't going to touch it, Lumina huffed, her glow turning slightly orange with indignation. I was just looking. Photonic beings can look without touching, you know. Vex had already pulled out a scanner, his compound eyes reflecting the artifact's glow. I don't even have readings for this. The energy signatures are unlike anything in my database. Doug approached cautiously, academic instincts fully awakened. The structure resembles precursor technology. See these markings? Classic 5th-era symbolism. Kroll snorted. Great, the disgraced professor has opinions. The disgraced professor has 3 published works on precursor artifacts, Doug shot back. Which is 3 more than you have, Lizard Command. Supreme Lizard Command, Kroll corrected automatically. Doug circled the artifact, careful not to touch it. This isn't just decorative. The configuration suggests it's a tool of some kind. Communication, perhaps. Vex's antennae twitched. Communication with what? As if in response, the artifact pulsed brighter, and holographic symbols began projecting outward, filling the chamber with ghostly light. Should it be doing that? Lumina asked nervously. Definitely not, Vex confirmed. The symbols resolved into what appeared to be a galactic map, with countless tiny pinpoints of light spanning the projection. One particular point, presumably their location, pulsed brighter than the others. It's a network, Doug breathed, understanding dawning. A communication network spanning, hell, it looks like the entire charted galaxy and beyond. Impossible, Kroll dismissed. No technology could maintain quantum entanglement at that scale. Unless it's not using quantum entanglement, Doug mused. What if it's using something we haven't discovered yet? The artifact pulsed again, and suddenly voices filled the chamber, thousands of them, in languages Doug had never heard before, overlapping in a cacophony of alien communication. It's listening, Vex realized. It's been listening all along. To what? Lumina asked. Everything, Doug answered, his academic excitement overriding his recent cynicism. It's monitoring communications throughout the galaxy. That's terrifying, Kroll admitted. That's incredible, Doug corrected. Do you realize what this means? This outpost wasn't abandoned, it was hidden. Someone wanted this technology concealed here, away from the major powers. But why? Vex asked. Before anyone could answer, one voice rose above the others in the chaotic symphony, clear, cold, and speaking in perfect standard English. Concordance fleet assembled. Target vector locked. Cleansing protocol will commence in 72 standard hours. May the impure be purged from our galaxy. The room fell silent as the voice faded. That, said Doug grimly, didn't sound like a friendly neighborhood welcoming committee. What's a concordance? Lumina's light had dimmed to a worried blue-gray. Nothing good, Kroll growled, suddenly all business. And cleansing protocols never involve spa treatments and refreshing beverages. Doug turned to Vex. Can you access the targeting data? Where's this cleansing protocol headed? Vex worked the controls frantically. Working on it. Got it. Oh. Oh? Doug didn't like the sound of that. Oh. The target vector, Vex's mandibles clicked anxiously. It's heading straight through this sector. Earth is in the projected path. So is this outpost. Doug stared at the holographic display, watching as a red line cut through the stars toward their position. He'd come to Epsilon 12 seeking solitude, a place to hide from his failures. Instead, he'd found a forgotten outpost full of refugee aliens and an ancient device that had just informed them they were all about to be cleansed. Well, he said, taking a long swig directly from his whiskey bottle, isn't that just perfect timing? I need to understand, Doug said, pacing the command center where they'd relocated for an emergency meeting. What exactly is the concordance? The assembled aliens, not just Vex, Lumina, and Kroll, but representatives from all 17 species residing on Epsilon 12 exchanged uncomfortable glances. A bulbous creature that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a potato floated forward. The concordance isn't so much a who as a what, it explained in a burbling voice. They're a coalition of species who believe in galactic purity. Meaning? Doug pressed. Meaning, Kroll interjected. They think some species deserve to exist and others don't. Guess which category most of us fall into? They're fanatics, Vex added, manipulating a holographic display that showed the projected course of the approaching fleet. They believe advanced species have a duty to guide galactic evolution by eliminating what they call evolutionary dead ends. They tried to exterminate my entire species, Lumina said quietly. They called us energy anomalies rather than true life forms. I'm one of only a few hundred survivors. Doug ran a hand through his hair. And they're heading this way? To what, sterilize this sector? That appears to be the case, confirmed a being that seemed to be composed entirely of geometric shapes that shouldn't be able to talk, yet somehow managed. Their previous cleansing operations have left nothing alive. But why now? Doug wondered. This outpost has been here for centuries. Perhaps it's not the outpost they're after, Vex suggested. Earth has been expanding its colonies rapidly in the last decade. Maybe they finally attracted unwanted attention. Or maybe, Kroll said slowly, eyes narrowing, it's because we activated that artifact. If it can listen to them, maybe they can sense when it's active. A nervous murmur rippled through the assembled aliens. Doug shook his head. No, the timing doesn't work. They said the fleet was already assembled. This operation has been planned for a while. So what do we do? Asked a small furry creature with 8 eyes. Run? Run? There's nowhere to run, Kroll growled. Their cleansing protocols are thorough. They'll sweep every planet, moon, and asteroid in the sector. Doug found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. We fight back. What? The room fell silent, then erupted in incredulous laughter. Fight the Concordance? Vex chittered in what Doug assumed was insect hysteria. With what? Our outpost has 1 defense turret, and it's currently being used as a clothes dryer. Not with weapons, Doug clarified, surprised at his own sudden investment in their survival. With that artifact downstairs. It's a communication device of unprecedented power. We use it to warn everyone in the path of destruction. And then what? Kroll demanded. We all hold hands and sing songs while we wait to be vaporized together? No, Doug said, warming to his idea. We unite them. Look around this room, 17 different species living together in harmony despite having nothing in common except being outcasts. If you can do it, others can too. Unite who, exactly? Asked the jellyfish potato. Everyone, Doug said simply. Every independent outpost, colony, station, and planet in this sector. Humans, aliens, refugees, settlers, everyone the Concordance considers disposable. Together we might have a chance. That's insane, Kroll declared. Perhaps, agreed the geometric shape being. But insanity may be our only option when faced with extinction. Doug looked around the room. I studied xenoanthropology because I believed different species could understand each other if they tried, that we're stronger together than apart. I spent my career building bridges between cultures. Until your career imploded, Kroll reminded him helpfully. Yes, thank you for that, Doug said dryly. My point is, I know how to communicate across species barriers. With that artifact, I can do it on a scale never before attempted. Vex's antennae twitched thoughtfully. The technical challenges would be immense. We'd need to modify the artifact to broadcast rather than just receive. Can it be done? Doug asked. Maybe, Vex admitted. With the right expertise and a lot of luck. I'm in, Lumina announced, her glow brightening with determination. My people were scattered because we faced the Concordance alone. I won't make that mistake again. One by one, the other aliens voiced their agreement until only Kroll remained silent. Commander? Doug prompted. Kroll sighed dramatically. This plan is ridiculous, almost certainly doomed to failure, and will probably get us all killed slightly sooner than if we just hid and hoped for the best. So you're in? Doug asked with a hint of a smile. Obviously, Kroll growled. Someone needs to be around to say I told you so when it all goes wrong. Then it's settled, Doug declared, feeling more alive than he had in months. We have 72 hours to modify an ancient alien artifact, establish communication with hundreds of disparate species, and unite them against the most powerful hostile force in the galaxy. When you put it that way, Vex said, it almost sounds impossible. Of course it's impossible, Doug agreed. But what's the alternative? As the meeting dispersed and preparations began, Doug found himself thinking that for a man who'd sought solitude, He'd certainly found himself in the middle of a very crowded apocalypse. Doug stared at the web of wiring Vex had attached to the artifact, trying to make sense of the improvised modifications. After 48 sleepless hours, the command center resembled the aftermath of a tornado hitting an electronics store. "Explain to me again how this is supposed to work," he asked, massaging his temples. Vex, who was currently hanging upside down from the ceiling to reach a particularly troublesome connection, sighed. "For the 7th time, we're using the artifact's existing network to piggyback our own signal. Think of it like hijacking a radio frequency, except the radio is ancient alien technology we barely understand, and the frequency spans the entire galaxy." "That clarifies nothing," Doug muttered. "It doesn't have to make sense to you," Kroll said, entering with a stack of equipment. "It only has to work." Lumina, who had been serving as a living power source for some of the more delicate components, pulsed wearily. "The problem isn't just sending the signal. It's making sure every species can understand it. There are over 400 documented languages in this sector alone." "That's where I come in," Doug reminded them, gesturing to the cultural translation algorithms he'd been programming. "My expertise isn't just academic. Before my professional setback, I developed a universal cultural interpreter. The xenolinguistic pattern should work across most sentient communication systems." "Should?" Kroll emphasized skeptically. "Will," Doug corrected with more confidence than he felt. "Besides, we're not looking for perfect translation. We just need them to understand danger and unite, and here's the plan." "Speaking of the plan," Vex chittered, dropping from the ceiling to inspect a connection, "do we actually have one beyond everyone fight together?" It was a fair question. Doug had been so focused on establishing communication that he'd given less thought to what they'd actually say once they had everyone's attention. "The concordance relies on division," Doug said slowly, thinking out loud. "They target isolated worlds, species that stand alone. Their cleansing protocols work because no one fights back together." "So we propose a unified defense?" Lumina suggested. "More than that," Doug said, excitement building as the idea formed. "We create a network, not just for communication but for coordination. If we can use the artifact to link ships, stations, and ground forces across the sector, we could respond to the concordance as one united front. Hit them where they're weak, protect each other's vulnerable points." Kroll looked grudgingly impressed. "That's actually not terrible." "High praise indeed," Doug said dryly. "But will anyone listen?" Vex wondered. "Why would established worlds trust a message from an abandoned outpost?" "Because we'll have proof," Doug countered. "The artifact doesn't just receive and send, it can show. We've seen the Concordance fleet. We can transmit those images, their communications, their planned route. Hard evidence is hard to ignore." Oscar's hologram materialized in their midst. Fascinating strategy discussion. "Also, minor technical detail, we have 22 hours until the Concordance fleet enters weapons range, and our modifications are only 37% complete." "Thank you, Oscar," Doug sighed. "Always helpful." "I exist to serve," the octopus hologram beamed. "Also, the probability of our survival is approximately—" "Don't tell us," everyone said simultaneously. 6 hours and many engineering disasters later, they were ready for their first test. The artifact, now surrounded by a jury-rigged mess of cables, converters, and power sources, hummed ominously. "This is either going to work brilliantly or vaporize us all," Vex announced cheerfully. "Those outcomes aren't mutually exclusive," Kroll pointed out. Doug checked his translation algorithm one last time. "We're starting small. Just trying to reach the mining colony on Europa. Ready?" Lumina, serving as the power regulator, pulsed affirmatively. "Ready." Initiating transmission in 3, 2, 1. The artifact pulsed bright blue, then violet, then a color Doug's human eyes couldn't quite process. The holographic display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be the inside of a bathroom. "Why are we looking at a toilet?" Kroll demanded. A startled-looking four-armed miner stared back at them from what was clearly the privacy of a restroom stall. The miner shrieked, dropped what appeared to be a magazine, and frantically tried to adjust their uniform. Wrong frequency. Vex yelped, adjusting controls frantically. "My apologies, citizen. Security test. Carry on." The display flickered out. "Well," Doug said after a moment of stunned silence, "at least we know the visual transmission works." "Let's try not to traumatize any more innocent bystanders," Lumina suggested. The next attempt reached the main communications center of the Europa colony, though the audio was translated into what appeared to be a recipe for something called grandmother's surprise casserole. The third attempt triggered emergency sprinklers in an unidentified space station. By the seventh try, they managed to establish clear communication with 3 separate outposts, though Kroll's face was somehow replaced by that of a popular children's cartoon character. "We're getting there," Doug encouraged, ignoring the commander's lizard body topped with the smiling face of Captain Sparklebottom, beloved Interstellar Kids show host. "The translation matrix is learning with each attempt." "We have 16 hours left," Vex reminded them. "Learning curves are a luxury we can't afford." "There has to be a way to streamline this," Doug muttered, studying the artifact. Then it hit him. "We're thinking too complicated. We don't need perfect translation across all species simultaneously." "We don't?" Lumina asked. "No, we just need to create a chain. We contact key hub worlds and outpost places where multiple species already coexist and have established translation protocols. They become our relay points. Passing the message along informs their local species can understand." Kroll's Captain Sparklebottom face somehow managed to look impressed. "That could work." "It will work," Doug insisted. "We have everything we need right here, 17 species who already understand each other. You are the proof that interspecies cooperation is possible." For the next 12 hours, they refined their approach. Rather than attempting to reach everyone at once, they identified 20 strategic locations across the sector. Each would receive specific information tailored to their populations, along with instructions to spread the warning further. "It's time," Vex announced as their deadline approached. "The Concordance fleet has entered the outer system. We broadcast now or never." Doug looked around at the improbable allies he'd found in this forgotten outpost, beings who by all conventional wisdom should be enemies or at least strangers, but united by circumstance and now by purpose. "Let's rewrite galactic history," he said, placing his hand on the activation switch. "Such a dramatic human," Kroll muttered, but placed his scaled hand next to Doug's anyway. One by one the others joined, until beings of all shapes, sizes, and compositions were connected in a circle around the artifact. "For a man who came here seeking solitude," Lumina observed, her light glowing warmly, "you've certainly found yourself in crowded company." Doug smiled. Couldn't have happened to a more reluctant hero. Together, they activated the broadcast. The first response came from Europa, a simple text message: "We hear you. We stand ready." Then Numar's colony, defense grid online. Coordinates received. Then a dozen more, each confirmation bringing fresh hope. The message was spreading faster than they'd dared dream. Species that had been isolated were connecting. Old enemies were establishing temporary truces. A network was forming just as they'd planned. "It's working," Doug breathed, watching the holographic display as thousands of signal points activated across the sector map. "They're listening." Ni. Moeo, Mojas Haja. "They're doing more than listening," Vex noted, examining the incoming data. "They're organizing. Look, the quantum shipyards at Titan are redirecting their defense fleet. The Procyon Collective is deploying their energy shield technology to vulnerable colonies. The Concordance fleet entered the system 8 hours later and found not a collection of isolated, vulnerable targets, but a coordinated resistance unlike anything they'd encountered before. Where they expected to find Earth standing alone, they discovered human ships fighting alongside vessels of a dozen different species. When they targeted the supposedly abandoned Epsilon 12 outpost, they found it shielded by technology from 3 different worlds. Doug watched from the command center, barely breathing as the battle unfolded across the system. The Concordance forces were powerful, but they had never faced a unified opposition. Their tactics relied on isolation and fear, neither of which were working. "They're retreating," Kroll announced in disbelief as the enemy ships began to pull back. "They're actually retreating." The command center erupted in cheers, appendages of all varieties raised in celebration. Doug found himself lifted bodily by 2 enthusiastic aliens who appeared to be made primarily of tentacles. "Put me down," he protested, though he couldn't help grinning. "We haven't won yet. They'll regroup and try again." "Let them," Vex chittered confidently. "The network is established now. The alliance will only grow stronger." "What happens next?" Lumina asked, hovering near Doug's shoulder. It was a good question. Doug had come to Epsilon 12 seeking an end, the quiet conclusion to a failed career. Instead, he'd found a beginning. Officially, Kroll declared this outpost will now serve as Coordination Hub Alpha for the new alliance. No longer forgotten or abandoned. "And unofficially?" Doug asked. Kroll's reptilian face broke into what might charitably be called a smile. "Unofficially, I'm promoting myself to Grand Admiral." "Of course you are," Doug sighed. 3 months later, Epsilon 12 was unrecognizable. Once empty corridors bustled with representatives from dozens of worlds. The artifact, now housed in a proper research facility rather than a forgotten sublevel, served as the heart of an interstellar communication network. And Doug found himself appointed as Chief Senior Diplomatic Officer, a title he suspected Kroll had invented purely to annoy him. "Professor Mercer," Lumina called, finding him on the observation deck. "The Andromeda team is here, the ones who published before your research." Doug stiffened. And they're admitting they had access to your preliminary findings through a shared database. They're formally retracting their claim of original research and acknowledging your work." Doug blinked. "There, what?" "Academic vindication," Lumina said happily. "Your name is cleared." Doug looked out at the stars, then at the busy outpost that had become a symbol of unity. "You know what? It doesn't matter anymore." "It doesn't?" "I came here looking for solitude," Doug explained. "A place to hide from my failures. Instead, I found something much better." "A chance to save the galaxy?" Lumina suggested. "No," Doug said with a smile. "Community. Purpose. And the most dysfunctional found family in the universe." As if on cue, Oscar's hologram appeared. "Emergency in the diplomatic quarter. Commander, excuse me, Grand Admiral Kroll has challenged the Sirius ambassador to a friendly arm wrestling match. There are now 17 broken chairs and a small fire." Doug sighed, but couldn't hide his smile. "Tell them I'll be right there." "Also," Oscar added cheerfully, "I've taken the liberty of restocking your synthetic whiskey supply. I suspect you'll need it." As Doug hurried to prevent an interstellar incident, he reflected that for a man who had sought solitude on a forgotten alien outpost, he'd certainly failed spectacularly. And for once in his life, failure felt remarkably like success. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he.